just saying queer people should not support Palestine or support Palestinians, you're alienating a whole lot of queer communities, like Palestinian queer people. If you fight for your own liberation, but you do not support the liberation of an entire population that is living under an ongoing settler colonial occupation, then you're not authentic. Then you're being selfish.
We are funding your displacement, and then we are making it impossible for you to move around the world or go anywhere else. So it's like, what do you want people to do?
In 200 years, will Israel be making land acknowledgements to Palestinians?
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Queer Collective podcast. I am your host, Carbon.
I'm Emily.
And I am Moody.
And welcome to the show.
Today we are joined by Mahmoud Shabeeb, who is also known as Moody, which I think is the most main character nickname ever. I really love that name. As promised, Moody is with us today to speak about the Queer Palestinian experience. Moody was born in Jerusalem to two Palestinian refugees' parents. He grew up in Jordan and moved to Canada in 2020. Moody is an advocate for a free Palestine. He works in PR and communications and volunteers with the bereaved families of Ontario.
So what we feel is lacking in society right now is a sense of humanity and compassion. And in order to achieve that, we believe that we must have a deeper understanding of the experiences of those who don't always have their voices platformed. So in today's episode, we'll be providing a bit of geopolitical context to invite everybody into the conversation. And then we'll dive deeper into why the queer community should stand up in solidarity. And then we'll explore the queer Palestinian and the overall Palestinian experience. And we'll leave you all on a note of queer Palestinian joy. For our Jewish listeners, we know that you have suffered losses and you are grieving. Know that we hold space for that grief and its ties to generational trauma. When we say that Queer Collective is for the entire queer community, we really do mean that, and we say that with our full chest. We deeply honor those of you who have bravely spoken out and are not allowing your grief to be used to validate a genocide. So I encourage you all to take a deep breath and please listen with open hearts and open ears.
So before we get into this conversation, we of course want to give a bit of background on the context here to invite everyone into the conversation. I'm going to give just a little bit of context and then I'll let Moody take it away. But important to note here is, of course, the longer history and context going on in Palestine. So prior to 1948, there was no state of Israel. It was established in 1948 and has been expanding over time. We've all seen the maps showing land loss of Palestinians over time. And it would be impossible to think that all of these changes happened without displacement, bloodshed, and ethnic cleansing. I think that this is the overarching context for everything that we have witnessed on October 7th. And of course, that comes with 75 years of occupation and settler colonialism. The media tends to portray the series of events happening back on October 7th as something that happened in a vacuum. But I think it's really important to give that context here for our listeners. So I'm wondering, Moody, with that being said, if you can provide some more context for our listeners on the current situation happening in Gaza right now.
For sure. Thank you, Em. And you put it perfectly. 75 years of displacement, genocide, ethnic cleansing. Entire villages in historic Palestine were wiped off the map. They do not exist. My maternal grandmother owned pieces of land in town that used to exist, does not exist anymore, that was called the Abbasiyya, outside Jaffa, so not far from Tel Aviv. And those lands were confiscated consequently, and many of them were turned into pieces of land as part of the Tel Aviv airport. This is just one of numerous examples. As you said perfectly, it was not born in a void on October 7th. It did not just happen in a vacuum. It wasn't just like the media likes to say time and again, barbaric, unprovoked terrorist attacks. And very sadly, these words were taken a lot, I think, too far, even by politicians, people like the mayor, Olivia Chow, who then called protesters in Toronto like myself.
Yeah.
Imagine being a Palestinian whose family has suffered generation after generation, going out on a protest just to demand literally the stop of a genocide that we're seeing before our eyes.
Yeah.
For her to say those protests were unsanctioned by the city of Toronto and all those protesters were barbaric terrorists, and me living in Toronto, of course I felt terrified for myself and for my friends. Because this is, statistically speaking, the most diverse city in the entire world.
Yeah.
You cannot live in a city like Toronto, and you cannot be the mayor of a city like Toronto, an immigrant yourself, of a different background, and say something that alienates such a big group of people and paints everyone with such a horrible broad brush and a horrible color. But what happened in Gaza, what I really, really would like to emphasize for our listeners today, and I am very grateful for you guys for this opportunity, and I'm very grateful for listeners from all backgrounds and all areas of life, because you would only be listening to this if you're willing to learn more and educate yourself more. But as Palestinians, we do not think this is Gaza, this is the West Bank, this is Israel, this is East Jerusalem, this is West Jerusalem. To us, it's all one land. We're all one people. There are millions, actually, of Palestinians, at least 1 million, who live in modern-day Israel and carry Israeli passports. These are as Palestinian as I am, as Palestinian as the people of Gaza, as Palestinian as the people of Jerusalem and West Bank. The West Bank, before October 7th, was undergoing the worst and bloodiest kind of tensions in 2023 in at least 2 decades since the last intifada of the year 2000. Children were being killed, whether by the Israeli army or Israeli settlers, every day. When I say Israeli settlers, many of these just moved from, say, Brooklyn, New York, or France, or etc.
Because people of Jewish descent, is that right? They're able to just claim Israeli citizenship very, very easily.
100%.
And claim land.
Yeah, whereas Palestinian people do not have the right to get Israeli citizenship. Is that correct?
100%. And not just that. I was born in Jerusalem, as you said at the beginning, and I am not allowed now to go visit Jerusalem. Israel has the full right on quote-unquote security basis to refuse me entry. I could get there and they could turn me around, send me back all the way over the Atlantic back to Canada. And no one can say anything because this is a matter of national security for them. Whereas, like you said, maybe a French Jewish person was born and lived their whole life in France without any ties to the land, can just pick up and leave now and go there. And that's not something, I personally do not blame them at all. Jews have been persecuted for hundreds of years at least, everywhere they go. But that is not to say we as Palestinians were the bad guys or the persecutors. We were not. We are not.
No.
Everything that happened in Europe led to, not saying this very lightly, but, the oppressed being the oppressor, or we say, hurt people hurt people. This is not an issue of religion for any of us. Palestine was a land of all kinds of backgrounds and religions.
Living peacefully.
100%.
Prior to 1948.
There are photos that are videos you can see prior to 1948 of Jews, Christians, and Muslims all coexisting on the same street, for instance, in Jerusalem. There are tons of photos like that can show you that history. Whenever I hear about tensions and civilians being killed in their own villages by the real terrorists, the actual illegal settlers, and I say that very comfortably because those settlements that have been expanded and continue to be expanded across the West Bank are considered unanimously as illegal settlements by the UN, by every country on the face of the earth, including Canada, including the United States. Both big, rich G7 countries who are advocating relentlessly and unconditionally for Israel. But they both consider those settlements illegal settlements. The only country that does not consider them that is Israel, because they want to annex the entire land. And there are so many Israelis that are against that. There are tons of Jews around the world that are against that. But just to put it into perspective, there have been tons of photos out there with a perfect juxtaposition of, say, on one side, a Ukrainian carrying a mortar or some kind of a bomb or even a gun, and the exact same angle, the exact same self-defense or attack tool, but with a Palestinian. Present it to those people who, many of them are just not educated enough on the matter, which is okay. But what's not okay is refusing continuously to be educated, refusing to admit that you spoke too soon or prematurely without educating yourself enough on the matter, and backtracking your wrong positions, showing those two photos and saying, why is this a hero and why is this a terrorist? Why don't you accept both the same level? And they'll tell you, because Palestinians aren't terrorists. But why? Because they are. Is it because we're not white enough? Is it because in your brain they are not Christian, although that's very wrong? There are so many Palestinian Christians. Alienating all of them is racist. Alienating all of them is dangerous, is just lying about demographics. I'm a Muslim. I am not your everyday Muslim, obviously, for details we're going to get into shortly. But there are so many people like me. There are so many people different from me. There are so many people across the entire spectrum. And we were a lot more diverse and also homogenous at the same time before the creation of the State of Israel. So like you said, we cannot be perfect victims. We cannot be perfect victims all the time. And we're not going out in support of one side or another, be it Hamas or whatnot. We're going out in support of our right to exist. The legislature met today and voted 78 against 0 votes that objected to the voting for Israel's right to defend itself. This
They
is the
voted
government
in favor of that.
in favor. To translate it to more explicit words, they voted in favor of genocide.
Yeah.
They voted in favor of the continuation of the killing of the people in Gaza.
Yeah.
A hospital was bombed just a couple days ago,
Yeah.
where in one single bomb, around 500 people were killed.
Yeah.
Not only 500 people. Most of those were injured already and being treated there. The rest, much needed, overstretched healthcare workers that Gaza cannot continue to exist without. This is a deliberate genocide.
Yeah.
There are tons of statements out there by Israeli officials that if you read them, your whole body will shiver. Just saying, we want to wipe Gaza off the map. We want to do this. We want to do that. Justin Trudeau can see that. We have to kill those children before they grow up and become terrorists themselves. That's what they say over and over again. Naftali Bennett was just hosted in an event in Toronto a couple of months ago. Naftali Bennett, one of his slogans when he was campaigning to become a prime minister, and he became a prime minister, and mind you, Naftali Bennett is supposed to be on the opposite side of the political spectrum in Israel and supposed to be more liberal. They're all one and the same. One of his statements was, I have killed so many Arabs in my lifetime, and I do not mind killing more. For the government of Ontario, that we have elected into power, that supposedly represents us, to take all of that and just slap us right in the face and vote 78 yes, 0 no. Sadly, the NDPs abstained from voting, which I consider just as cowardly as voting yes, to continue shelling and bombing and killing innocent lives in Gaza. We do not accept that as Canadians. We should not accept that. We should learn better from our country's history and from priding ourselves as a modern-day democracy.
Also from our own genocide of the indigenous peoples of this land.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
We've recently learned how grave that situation was by how many bodies we've been finding in residential schools. And now as Canadians, we have the opportunity to speak out and to do better. And unfortunately, right now, we're seeing that a lot of people are failing. To give people more context, and just in terms of numbers and stats, just to really put this whole situation that's happening, we've given the greater context, but now I do want to give the context as of October 7th for people. So as of October 7th, Hamas, which is the militant group which governs but does not represent over 2 million Palestinian people living in Gaza, brutally murdered more than 1,400 Israeli civilians. This has been what has been used as ammo now for Israeli and their right to quote unquote defend themselves
100%.
against over 2 million people who live in Gaza, who are 50% children. In the week following the attack, Israel dropped over 6,000 bombs on Gaza, which is more than the US dropped on Afghanistan in 1 year. And for context, Gaza is half the size of New York City. So the death toll in Gaza so far has surged to over 3,800, with countless family lineages being entirely wiped out. Another piece of context for people to know is that Gaza essentially is an open-air prison. There's nowhere for these people to go. And they've cut off water, electricity, and are not bringing in any food for people. So essentially, if we aren't speaking out right now, you're leaving a lot, like 2 million people to die. And that's really what I want people to know going into this conversation.
100%. And I just want the listeners to take a moment to let these numbers sit with them. These are not just numbers. These are people. These are entire lives, entire stories. Every single person of those people had hopes and dreams for their lives like you and I have. That siege continues. Israel claims that they have been letting water go in. That is not entirely accurate because A, they only let that for a very small portion of the entire strip, and B, even that portion cannot benefit from that water because they don't have running water that comes down in the tap most of the time, just like us. They need generators. Those generators need electricity, which is not running. They need fuel, which they do not have anymore. It includes hospitals where there are babies in incubators, there are cancer patients, there are people in very, very severe and dire health conditions. To put it into context, just think as an Ontarian how much we're struggling with our healthcare system here that is not able to respond to the demand of the people. That is not even a fraction of what people in Gaza were facing before this genocide. And we should not shy away from naming things the way they are, because maybe that will shake people enough to actually wake up and put things into perspective. What have we learned from the genocides of indigenous communities in North America and Turtle Island? What have we learned from colonialism and settler colonialism and all kinds of genocides all around the world? If we do not learn from history, we are bound to repeat it. We are seeing it being repeated before our eyes literally right now as we speak. One of the memes that I saw, not all memes are funny, some of them are just completely chilling, was in 200 years, will Israel be making land acknowledgements to Palestinians?
That's what I was wondering as well.
And I was wondering about that in my head before seeing the meme too. Do we really want to do that, or should we just stop it right now? Because we have seen that happen. It has happened in many parts of the world because of settler colonialism. And we are bound to make it stop right now. I'm not just speaking as a Palestinian. I'm speaking as a human being.
With all of that being said, I'm wondering, you being someone who has experience grief, and you're somebody who volunteers with the bereaved families of Ontario, I'm wondering if you have any advice for folks who are experiencing grief right now, especially in this moment, in relation to this conflict.
Nothing makes it easy. I lost my mother early last year, and since then I've been desensitized to a lot of the day-to-day problems that seemed much bigger to me before. However, obviously this conflict or, genocide in the past couple of weeks has pushed me to tears and to full-on breakdowns multiple times for obvious reasons. And I just want to tell everyone experiencing this, your feelings are completely valid. Survivor guilt is real. Do not diminish your feelings. Do not push them down. Take time for yourself. Take time to cry. Take time to put your feelings into words. Seek help if you can. There are incredible people out there who would be very willing to help you. My therapist is such an incredible person. He's a white guy. He's also gay. He is terrific. Shout out to him. He's gonna watch this episode, and he helps me a lot with these moments. And there's many more people out there who can help you, who are there for us. And this might be difficult, but please do your best to exercise seeing the bright side. These protests, the countless petitions, the people coming together on social media and in real life for Palestine to call on stopping the suffering of the people of Gaza, there are silver linings. They do not at all mount to the suffering and the genocide and the thousands of lives lost and the many more lives we're worried about for good reasons. But that will help fuel your energy and help you continuing to plow forward in this uphill battle. And one last thing I can say is, of course, it's okay to take time for yourself. Of course, it's okay to switch off, not watch the news. If you have families there, I cannot even begin to put into words how awful and how terrifying and how scary that is. Take time for yourself. Eat something that you love. Watch a light show that makes you laugh. Sleep. Stay nourished, stay nurtured, because you need all of that to continue the fight. You owe it to the people of Palestine. You owe it to yourself. You owe it to your family. You owe it to your loved ones. If you completely burn out, that's not going to help anyone. So just take care of yourselves.
Thank you.
So next, we really want to dive into why we think that the queer community in particular should stand in solidarity. There's this idea floating around that when it comes to Israel's occupation of Palestine, that the queer community should side with Israel because their laws are supposedly comparably the most progressive in the Middle East. And I just really wanted to know, like, what's your take on this? What do you think of this argument?
First of all, it's important to debunk the myths. That is not true at all, as far as Israel being a progressive country and quote unquote the only democracy in the Middle East. If everything you're seeing before your eyes in color, in motion, has not debunked that myth for you, and there's nothing democratic about what Israel is doing, and nothing democratic about how the state itself was established. If you still need me to convince you, I rest my case. I don't know what else to tell you, but I hope that you have an open heart and that you allow yourself to listen and don't just take my words for it. Go out there, educate yourself, not by listening to and watching mainstream Western media, which still calls us terrorists and calls the Palestinian side barbaric, the Israeli side self-defense and whatnot. And I'm not talking about Fox News. I'm talking about left-leaning.
Any media
Literally
at this
all
point.
media.
Any media, any Western media at this point, with very few exceptions. And if I'm allowed to make some good references for people to, as a starting point, check out Jewish Voice for Peace. Jewish Voice for Peace are absolutely incredible. They're amazing. What they do is huge. My dad, who's a Palestinian refugee and who has struggled of his plight for his entire life, is an avid supporter and a regular donor to Jewish Voice for Peace.
Democracy Now! Is a good one as well.
Democracy Now! Is great. There's The Nation. The Nation is an incredible American media outlet. They say it as it is. There's a lot of advocates out there. Naomi Klein, who is Jewish and just amazing and great. Mona and Mohammed al-Kurd, the very famous Palestinian twins who live in Jerusalem. They can show you everything. Particularly Mohammed, most of his content is in English, and he's such a great spokesperson. This is as far as debunking that myth. And also to add one point to that is Tel Aviv is not all of Israel. A couple of streets in Tel Aviv are not all of Israel, or not all of Tel Aviv even. If you try to be your authentic gay self, other parts of Israel, you will not be tolerated. You will not be accepted. Versus, for instance, I have been to Lebanon many times. Lebanon is a beautiful country. They're struggling a lot right now. But Lebanon has so much more acceptance of gay people and of queer people. Not the laws, because the laws were all colonial. I went gay clubbing in Lebanon countless times. Absolutely amazing scene. I know expats or foreigners who enjoyed that scene so much more than they did in Europe or North America. I enjoyed that scene a lot more than the modest gay scene here in Toronto, for instance. And I'm talking about 10, 15 years ago, not even like very recently. On the other hand, queer liberation in the West was not a movement that has always existed. You do not want to hear the homophobic slur that I hear myself here in Toronto. The attacks that I get. Modern day. There's tons of homophobes here. And I'm not saying immigrants and people like me and Muslims, which is what a lot of listeners will think. I'm talking your day-to-day white people. I was just in a cafe before coming here, and this lovely Jamaican lady walks in and she starts hitting on me, just being very funny and cute. Oh my God, sir, are you married? I said, no, I'm not. Oh, wow. Can you be my boyfriend? You're very handsome. I said, no, I'm gay. And the barista was like, he is probably not into you. And then she asked me again, you're what? I said, I'm gay. She was like, oh, okay, that's fine. Thank you so much for telling me. This is the Jamaican lady. And she sat down next to me, and then she looked at me and was like, you do you, to each their own. This is great. Thanks so much for confiding in me and telling me. But be careful out there. I said, I'm tired of hiding who I am. I lived most of my life hiding who I am. I cannot take that anymore. She said, I'm not saying you should hide yourself. Of course you shouldn't. And this is great. But just be careful. So imagine hearing that advice in queer West. We're not even in any part of Toronto. We're in one of the most openly gay, queer parts of the city. And you still hear people telling you that. Put that into perspective on the rest of the world. Yes, I'm Muslim. No, most religious Muslims do not tolerate homosexuality. And I'm fully aware of that. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat it. but also most religious people
Yeah.
of Abrahamic divine
I was
religions.
going to say, you could say that pretty much about any religion.
100%.
Yeah.
Most Catholics, most Christians.
Well, even just looking at the South right now in the United States, a lot of Christian conservatives are making it a very unsafe place for a lot of
100%.
queer people. Would I want them to die in a genocide? No, I would still fight for their rights.
100%.
As just on a baseline, like as a human being, I care for people's human rights. I'm a queer activist for sure, and I'm also an activist for human rights. And I think both exist. And then beyond that, I also believe that in all of these places where queer people do not have all the rights and freedoms that we have here, they still exist. Queer people still exist everywhere, and their stories still matter, and their lives matter.
Just saying queer people should not support Palestine or support Palestinians, you're alienating a whole lot of queer communities.
Yeah.
Like myself as a Palestinian, like Palestinian queer people in Palestine, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, in Gaza. And that is pretty homophobic.
Yeah.
It's homophobic and racist.
That's actually an argument that really bothers me. When people say, well, you shouldn't want to support Palestinians or because it's like such large majority Muslim, and Muslim people don't like you. Muslim people are homophobic. And to me, that is the complete erasure of queer Palestinians, of queer Muslims even, which do exist.
Queer Muslims have always existed. There are countless resources out there that can tell you stories in the Umayyad Caliphate, in the Abbasid Caliphate, in many histories around the world before and after Islam. There's this one beautiful piece that I like to share about Arabic art is until today, and anyone who speaks Arabic who's listening to me will know what I'm talking about. Arabic is a very gender segregated language to the point where even for non-binary people, we do not have the proper pronouns yet because they, them in Arabic wouldn't make sense.
Yeah.
And in Arabic, everything is feminine or masculine. All of this is to say a lot of the songs in Arabic sang by males until today address a male. And that is not to say that the singer is gay and addressing a gay man. But this historically came from even pre-Islam, pre-Muhammad Arabic era, very old version of Arabic. They used that language back then of a male poet addressing a male lover because they wanted to keep and protect the identity of their lover. And their lover could have been a male and could have been a female.
Yeah.
So this comes from that place because if their lover was a female all the way, and any man who sang or who wrote poetry to flirt with their lover was addressing a woman 100% of the time, they would have just addressed woman, end of the story. But actually, because they wanted to keep it as ambiguous, even as far as the gender of the person.
Wow.
They kept it like that. And until today, you hear a male singer going Habibi instead of Habibti. So Habibi is for a man, Habibti is for a woman. You'll hear tons of male singers singing Habibi.
Yeah.
And this comes from that.
This whole notion that queer people should not be in support of Palestinians as well is a very classic divide and conquer strategy. And a really interesting resource that has been popping up is Queering the Map that I recommend people check out. I'm not sure if you saw that.
It's amazing.
But a lot of folks in Gaza right now are posting their stories as queer people, and the pins are popping up a lot right now, and their stories are really heartbreaking and heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
And I recommend that you bear witness to them and see all of the queer people that do exist there and what their lives are like.
We were talking about how new and how recent queer liberation is, and it's still incomplete. Obviously, it's an ongoing fight for our identity, for our full liberation. As a queer person, you are, whether you like it or not, part of an oppressed minority.
Yeah.
And no liberation is complete until all liberation is complete.
Correct.
If you fight for your own liberation, but you do not support the liberation of an entire population that is living under an ongoing settler colonial occupation, then you're not authentic. Then you're being selfish and you're alienating, like I said, a whole entire population that also, like we said, includes a lot of queer, gay people.
I'm actually curious, like, how do you personally navigate the intersections of your identity, being Palestinian, being queer, being Muslim, etc.?
Every gay person, every queer person, their journey is different. from the others, and that applies to me. I never personally felt like the gay people who were conflicted with their identity or wishing harm upon themselves or asking or wondering why are they sick like that and how can they be cured and so on. I did, however, at some point in my life consider that heterosexual rights were more important than mine. Heterosexual families were real. A queer family is not real. So with that comes also part of what my identity is, who I am. And I refuse to believe that when God created me, he created me with this challenge and told me to abstain and hide who I am in order for me to find a better life in the afterlife. I fully refuse that notion. I believe that I was born this way. I've always felt that way. I remember as early in my life as when I was a single-digit child, my identity and the way I felt around women versus the way I felt around men. Or around boys or anything like that, or my interests were different from the majority of my peer boy interests. Obviously, not to reinforce any stereotypes, because you can check all the boxes of what your typical heterosexual boy or girl can be, but also be homosexual. Growing up as a child, I didn't think there was anything wrong with me. I do not. I never did. I never will. And again, I think God, I believe in God 100%. I love God unconditionally. I refuse the notion that God created me flawed, or that God is so sadistic that he created certain people with these tendencies to be incomplete and to be in perpetual torture, because I'm not attracted to women. I don't feel anything sexual or emotional towards a woman. When I see a pretty woman, I'll look at you and be like, oh my God, you're gorgeous. You look amazing today.
Thank you, Moody.
I love what you're wearing. I love your hairstyle. But it's because, I admire beauty. I see beauty when it's there. I see beauty in everything and everywhere. A big homophobic notion is if you're gay, that means you're thinking about sex the whole time. And that this is all what there is to you. No, of course not. It's a whole identity. That's why it's not sexuality only. Sexuality is one part of it. But it's a whole puzzle picture that all complete is so beautiful. And I believe that has always been who I am. That's how God created me. And that's as much of a part of my identity as the way I was born, as being a native Arabic speaker, as the way I look, my height, everything in me.
You told us before coming on this that you hadn't really come out to much of your family except for some of your nieces and nephews. And you said earlier on as well that your Palestinian identity and your queerness are still one and the same despite that fact. And I'm wondering how you kind of came to that feeling of them still feeling like one and the same despite not feeling like you can be 100% yourself with your family.
I don't think I'm not being 100% myself per se, like what I was saying earlier. I believe, and I have only come to realize that much later in life, that the notion of coming out to your family is complete Western notion. And I had a boyfriend for 6 years, and they all met him. They all love him. My sister, when he was visiting me last year, we only broke up early this year, but when he was visiting me last year, invited us to dinner, and he came with me. And we all sat together after dinner, had dessert and tea, and played board games like family stuff, 5-second rule and whatnot. And it just felt like a completely familial experience. So I always tell people, don't ask me if my family knows that I'm gay, because I cannot answer that. I can answer that I'm not out to most of them. But the fact of whether or not they know is not something that I have the full answer to. My mom passed away. I'm pretty sure deep down she knew. I say that moms always know. My identity, what my mom knew or didn't know, is again like part of my upbringing, part of my culture. How did I come to believe or to understand myself, see myself in the lens of being queer and Palestinian as one and the same? I think it's just my authenticity and being true to who I am and following my intuition and my passion. I was out in the protests against transphobia a few weeks ago out on Queen's Park. I carried a sign that said queer, Muslim, and proud. And lots of people approached me with that sign. This queer man who has been living in Canada for 20 years as Muslim, was covering his face completely because he didn't want his identity to be revealed. His white trans friend went and called him and brought him over to me. And when she came with him, she was already on the verge of tears. And he came and was like, "Can I hug you?" I was like, "Of course." And he hugged me and could not breathe and was like clenching onto me and to my shoulder. I was sure my shoulder was going to bruise because how passionate and how emotional he was, and was just gasping for air for a good 5 minutes. And then he looked at me and said, "I've been living in Canada for more than 20 years. I did not know there were other queer Muslims." I said, "There's a lot of us, and we will love you the way you are. We will accept you the way you are. We would be so happy for you to join us." Moving to Canada actually made me even more passionate about being Palestinian because the majority of Jordanians are of Palestinian descent. And maybe there we were just like too close. But when I'm here, I want to tell people that I'm Palestinian. I want to speak about that openly. I want to tell my story, my dad's story, because I feel like it's so important to educate people about that here. And it has never failed me until now. Everyone, when they listen to me, are so touched by my story and care so much about hearing more.
Next, we really want to move on to the overall Palestinian experience. And I'm wondering if you could share with us what life is like for your family that still lives or lived in Palestine. And like, if you could really paint a full picture for us, that would be great.
So to give context, my dad was born in Ein Karim, Jerusalem. Back then it was a village. Now it's just an outskirt of Western Jerusalem, fully Israeli. Their houses were beautiful, built full on of white stone and brick. And so many of those houses still stand until today. So we know that my grandfather's house is still there.
And someone else is living in it.
Yeah, there's an Iraqi Jewish family that was moved in there after 1948. And they hardly made any changes to the house because in 1999, I was very lucky to go visit it and see it with my dad just from the outside. And my dad could remember it because my dad was kicked out of his house when he was 13 and a half. So he could remember a lot of the details. And he said very easily, he was like, "That room was added. The iron bars on the windows were changed. The doors were changed. But like largely, most of it just stayed the same." Yeah. Which is like, I still can't remember bits and pieces of it from 1999. And it's just so beautiful. And my dad was an orphan to his dad's side. So his mom was a young widow of like 35 or less with a lot of children. When they were kicked out, of course, it was a mess and no one knew really what plight was like. And there were no Arab refugees at the time. To put it into context, we're talking about more than 75 years. So the Palestinian plight is actually the longest refugee plight in modern human history. And this is my story and my family's story. My dad and his mom lost track of each other, and he had his 2 younger sisters with him. She had other sisters with her, or other daughters. At the age of 13, he had to carry both his sisters from under one tree to another and sleep for at least a couple of days out in the wilderness, going from one village to another, asking about his mom until he reunited with her. And they were hopped on from one vehicle to another, just being taken from one village to another. An absolutely arduous and terrifying journey that like I can't even fathom. His oldest brother was an ambulance driver. He was driving towards a bridge, and I think it was dark, possibly, and the bridge had been blown up by Zionists. He ended up falling off the bridge with his ambulance vehicle and dying. Instead of him coming back to her, she learned the news of his death. And she didn't have time to grieve. She didn't have time to deal with her emotions. She had all these younger children she needed to feed. So she would go out from the very early morning till late at night to the fields with the locals to help them with agriculture. All of that just so that at the end of the harvest season, she could bring back some grains and some produce for her children to feed them. So they lived through horrors. My dad built himself and built his life out of nothing. My dad was born in Jerusalem or outside Jerusalem. He was kicked out of there when he was a 13-year-old teenager. And yet he is unable to go even visit without applying for a visa that he may or may not get. Israel can do whatever they want with that.
To go to the place he was born.
Not even.
Yeah.
Just to the West Bank.
Yeah.
The only way he could go to the place where he was born would be by being snuck into there.
When your house is being taken, even you saying that the house that your dad's family was kicked out of still exists. It was completely just a different family was moved into it. What is that process like? And are they given any compensation for anything, or where are they told to go? Where are they expected to go?
As far as I understood, the way it started was they had cleansed entire villages, killed everyone in them, spread the news so that those villagers, like my dad and his family, would be terrified. Oh my God, if those Zionists come to us now, what is going to come of us? Rumors were spread as part of that campaign. Leave your house, you will come back in 1 week. This is a very famous story. You see a lot of Palestinians with a map of Palestine on their wall and a key on it, because lots of those people carried the keys of their houses with them, fully hoping or expecting to go back actually in a few days when all of this is over. And the few days still haven't ended until now. My dad's side of the family fleeing for their safety from one village to another. They ended up in a Salt, a Jordanian city. And when my dad was 16, at the time, they had moved back to Jericho in Palestine. For those who are watching, also for context, Jericho, different parts of it were built as the first urban settlement that has continuously been inhabited until now in human history. And it was built by Canaanites. Canaanites are the ancestors of Palestinians and of Eastern Mediterranean people. So you can hear them called Canaanites, you can hear them being called Phoenicians. They're all one and the same, just different languages and different names for the same people. And so even when we talk about the Jewish exile and whatnot, it's not the way that the Zionist dream wants to paint it, that this was our land, we have the right to retake it.
No, I mean, it was, quote unquote, their land.
What was
in
it,
theory,
1200 BC?
like 2,000 years ago, right? More than 2,000 years ago.
You're talking about between 3,000 and 4,000
That's
years
like
ago.
if I all of a sudden was like, well, we're all from Africa, I'm going to go take back my land.
100%.
Then
100%.
it's like, no, it's not your land anymore.
It makes no sense. And here's the thing. Borders are a very, very modern and colonial concept.
Yes.
Humans have always been nomads and have always traveled from one place to another.
Just like
you said,
animals.
Yeah.
searching for a better livelihood, searching for more stable life.
Yeah. Speaking of just even the ability to move, right? Like that's a freedom that unfortunately not everybody has. And we know that a large amount of Palestinians right now are considered stateless, which means
100%.
when you're stateless, you can't move anywhere. You don't, it's like you don't exist.
So with Palestinians being the largest group of stateless people in the world, I'm wondering if you could paint a picture, especially for us Canadians, having one of the best passports in the world that gives us the most freedom of mobility. I'm wondering if you can paint us a picture of what a Palestinian person would face in terms of freedom of mobility in their day-to-day life.
For many Palestinians, that's virtually non-existent. A lot of Canadians, a lot of people in the developed West take that for granted. I grew up in Jordan with a Jordanian passport. Not the worst, but nowhere near Western passport. The first time I came to Canada, I came as a tourist. I had to go through a really complicated and ridiculous, just bureaucratic process, from bank statements to bank statements of my sister here, who was the person that invited me, to my sister's invitation letter, to my sister's passport copy and her lease and this and that, to my travel history in the last, I don't know how many years, to my to a letter from my employer stating that I work there and that I will come back, the deed of my car as an asset, that I would go back to Jordan and whatnot. And then I had to get a certified check from the bank. And when I got there, they were like, oh no, your check has been folded. We can see the fold. You have to go get us another certified check. And so I drove back to the bank to get another certified check. Of course, for each check, you pay a fee as well. And all this stupid process. And I literally was granted a 6-month single entry visa after that ridiculous process. Same thing for every single time I needed to go to Europe or the UK or the US. Yet, this is still a lot better than what many Palestinians have to go through. There are Palestinians who live as refugees, more than 70%, I think even a lot more, than the population of Gaza are of refugee backgrounds or displacement from other parts of historic Palestine, who between 1948 and 1967 fled from their original lands there and stayed there. It's very hard for a Palestinian to be granted a visa if they want to come visit Canada or go visit Europe, because those countries will worry that that person is never going back to their home. And it is that kind of process.
Yeah, it's this process of us in these colonial nations who are funding this genocide are paying to displace you, and then we won't even take you. We are funding your displacement, and then we are making it impossible for you to move around the world or go anywhere else. So it's like,
Precisely.
what do you want people to do?
So even though Canada makes it difficult for people from different backgrounds, especially ours, to immigrate here, it is still, ironically and sadly enough, doing so much better than other developed rich nations that can afford to take more people and need more people.
Obviously, you know a lot about the Arab experience because you lived in Jordan. You mentioned you partied in Lebanon. We ourselves have a lot of majority Lebanese friends. And I feel like regardless of where you're from, although not the same, there are a lot of parallels when it comes to the Arab experience overall.
100%.
A lot of our friends fear that, especially with what's happening right now, is that potentially, and if this mass genocide sees the light of day completely, that they're next. Their country is next. Their families are next. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that in particular.
Very great question. Very emotional and personal to me. Thank you. We do have this sort of pan-Arab dream. Maybe it's not realizable. Most probably will always be a dream. You don't hear about Canadians and Americans and British people dreaming of uniting and becoming one country. But there's countless maps and drawings and depictions online and everywhere that you can find of the pan-Arab world as sort of like one country. We have so much in common. Our language alone makes it, like, breaks a gigantic barrier that is so important. And our language is very diverse and very rich and beautiful. Not all Arabs understand each other. We have numerous dialects even within each country. But we do have that language in common. We do have that shared identity and pride. Sadly, it comes from a lot of real history that has happened. Like I mentioned earlier, Palestinians were the first refugees in the modern Arab world. So they did not really have experience or expectations what that was going to look like. There's a beautiful euphemism that we paint on that. We say, when things like that happen, we say the rosary broke and all the pieces like fell through. So it was one country after another since then, and still happening. You look at Iraq, Libya, Yemen, Sudan, Syria, obviously, even Lebanon now is not very stable. I mean, where do we even draw the line? And we wholeheartedly believe that if Palestine and the Palestinian people find stability and freedom, that other countries will follow suit, just like Palestine was the first to face that. One people's freedom and liberation cannot be separated from the rest, especially in such a homogenous region.
As someone with a BA in mass communications who's worked doing PR and media for over a decade now, I'm wondering what your perspective is on the media coverage, the mass media coverage of Gaza right now, as well as even tying it into the Arab diaspora and their fear to go out and protest as well because of this coverage, and potentially out of fear of losing their status in a country.
History has taught us that nothing is constant. Everything keeps changing. There were dictatorships in every part of the world. There were democracies in the Arab world before. It all ebbs and flows. Sadly, most of the Arab countries and Arabs live in tyrannies and live in constant fear. The reality is those are third world countries where your GDP is not great. The Human Development Index is not great. The majority of Arabs are very highly educated, very well-educated people in pursuit of a better life and a better future, which unfortunately many of us do not really realize because the median income is low, unemployment is high. So when you're literally worried about your and your family's day-to-day life and making ends meet and paying rent, you're not worried about protesting. You're not worried about asking for freedom. What would you do with freedom if you can't even find food? And sadly, what they saw happen with the so-called Arab Spring and subsequently made a lot of us lose hope. Protesting and revolting is not going to bring me more rights. It's going to take away what I the very little that I already have. To answer your question about the media piece, I would love for people to look up Hussam Zumlot, who is Palestinian ambassador to the UK. Phenomenal spokesperson. Every single time he does an interview with, say, BBC or CNN, the first question they ask him often, do you condemn Hamas?
Yeah, I know.
What do you think about the heinous terrorist attacks, this and that?
Yeah.
And again, I'm not disagreeing with that narrative. Neither is Hussam. It should not be on us as Palestinians to prove our humanity every single day. I am exhausted as a Palestinian living in Canada. I'm in a position to worry about my own life and my own security in a place like Toronto. I wanted so bad to wear a keffiyeh coming here, but of course I was scared. I really wanted to. Part of me forgot, but also part of me is still not ready to do that. And I don't want to be a hypocrite, like carry it in my backpack or hide it under my jacket and then come here and just put it on display, because it's a stance. This pendant is the map of historic Palestine. I've been called anti-Semitic because of it. This is absolute nonsense, and it's appalling and offensive and dangerous on all levels. The Palestinian liberation cannot be complete without the support of amazing Jewish people.
Absolutely.
There are right now, as we speak, hundreds of Jews in the US, in DC and New York, who, because they have been protesting for ending the blockade on Gaza and ending the bombing of Gaza, have been taken into prison. They knew that that repercussion might end up being their fate. They didn't care.
We know there's never liberation without hope. And I think the beauty of culture and Palestinian culture plays a central role in keeping hope. So I was wondering if you could share either your favorite memory of being in Palestine or the most beautiful thing about your culture, in your opinion.
I'll start with the second piece, which is definitely food. Palestinian food is heavenly. Do not listen to who tell you that falafel and kibbeh and hummus are Israeli. They're not. They're Levantine. Definitely try nabulsi knafe, which is a dessert with a ground of cheese. It's just absolutely heavenly. Try maklube. Maklube and stuffed vine leaves. They cannot be topped.
Those are so good.
Yeah. But to answer your first question, definitely my most beautiful memory from being in Palestine, and will always be one of my favorite memories of all time, was in 1999 on my birthday. My cousin, she and her husband and the son took me and my mom and my younger brother, because they have a Jerusalem car plate. They managed to sneak us through a checkpoint in historic Palestine, modern day Israel. And we went to Tel Aviv, we went to Jaffa or Yafa. We even barbecued in a park, looking at the sea. Beauty that cannot be compared to any other beauty in the world. It's just such a beautiful land. The vividness of that day still lives with me, and I will always look back at it with so much fondness and affection, but also hope that I know in my heart that I will be able to go there freely one day, freely and safely, and not worry about my safety, and not worry that I am less of a human there just because I'm Palestinian.
My last and final question for you is if you have a message that you'd like to leave our listeners with.
Please do not ever take what the media gives you as a fact. It almost never is. Do your research. Look up sources that are credible. If you, for instance, want to know about queer Palestinians, just go to Google. Look up queer Palestinians, queer Palestinian movements. You'll find a lot of resources in English that educate you, that even for me, I do not know a lot about that. I'm also very proud to be part of the Queer Muslim Network. Incredible people, incredible movement, super loving, super open, super welcoming. Look them up on Instagram. They share a ton of resources about queer history in Islam. There's so much more out there that you can learn. If you ever see me, you know what I look like. Please approach me. Please say hi. And thank you so much for being open and for listening. Thank you so much to both of you for this incredible opportunity. It's invaluable, and I feel so honored and fortunate to have shared this space with you today.
Thank you so much for being here with us and for your vulnerability and for sharing your story with us.
Thank you very much.
That is everything that we have for you today. And if you want to dive deeper into the queer Muslim experience, we do have a full episode on it with Bilal. Check it out right over here. Make sure that you hit subscribe and like the video. And if you're listening on the podcast app, please give us a 5-star review so that get this podcast guest out there to more people. If you really liked this episode, make sure to share it because these kinds of topics and episodes do get suppressed. So please make sure to share it with all of your friends. That's everything that we have for you today. And until next time, peace.